Hi there, boys and girls. It's Mrs. Mouri here to share a book with you today. You know, it's that time of year when we're thinking about bunnies, so today I've chosen The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. And they lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but don't go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there. He was put into a pie by Mrs. McGregor. Now run along and don't get into mischief. I'm going out." Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the wood to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns. Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were good little bunnies, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight to Mr. McGregor's garden and squeezed under the gate. First, he ate some lettuce and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But round the end of a cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting young cabbages, but he jumped up and ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling out, "Stop, thief!" Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten the way back to the gate. Peter lost one of his shoes among the cabbages and the other shoe among the potatoes, and after losing them, he ran on 4 legs and went faster. I think he might have gotten away altogether if he had not unfortunately run into a gooseberry net and got caught by the large buttons on his jacket. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons, quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed big tears, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to exert himself. "Try hard," they said. Mr. McGregor came with a sea look. It's like a strainer, boys and girls, which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter. But Peter wriggled out just in time, leaving his jacket behind him. Peter rushed out into the tool shed and jumped into a can. It would have been a beautiful thing to hide in if it hadn't had so much water in it. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps hidden underneath a flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, looking under each. Presently, Peter sneezed. "Kershoo!" I hope he covered like that. Remember, if you have to cough or sneeze, cover quickly. Achoo! Mr. McGregor was after him in no time. He tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out the window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter, and he went back to his work. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath and trembling with fright. He had not the least idea which way to go. Also, he was very damp from sitting in that can full of water. After a time, he began to wander about, going lippity, lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the wood. Peter asked her the way to the gate. but she had such a large pea in her mouth that she couldn't answer. She only shook her head at him, and Peter began to cry. Then Peter tried to find his way across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently he came to a pond, and a white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very, very still, and Peter thought it was best to go away. He had heard about cats from his cousin, Benjamin Bunny. Peter went back toward the tool shed. Suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scritch, scratch, scratch, scritch. Peter hurried underneath the bushes, but presently, as nothing had happened, he came out. He climbed upon a wheelbarrow and peeped over, and the first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor hoeing onions. His back was turned toward Peter, and beyond him was the gate. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow and started running as fast as he could go along a straight walk behind some black currant bushes. Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter didn't care. He slipped underneath the gate and was safe at last in the wood outside the garden. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Peter never stopped running, and he never looked behind him until he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand of the floor of the rabbit hole and shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking, and she wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost in a fortnight. I'm sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made him some chamomile tea. She gave a dose of it to Peter, 1 tablespoon to be taken at bedtime. But Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail had bread and milk and blackberries for supper. You know, boys and girls, I hope you learned a lesson from this book, and it's listen to your parents because they usually have good advice for you. You know, if you like this book, The Tale of Peter Rabbit, you might look online on YouTube. I know you can find lots of different versions of Peter Rabbit that you could watch the video. Also, they mentioned his friend Benjamin Bunny, and I know Benjamin Bunny's got some videos there on YouTube as well. It's been great sharing a book with you today, boys and girls. We'll hope that you're staying happy and healthy at home. We look forward to seeing you soon.